Think you know the pharaohs? Think again. Forget the gold and the pyramids for a second, because we are about to dive into the truly insane side of ancient Egypt's rulers. From bizarre rituals and power-hungry antics to some seriously strange personal habits, prepare to have your perception of these iconic figures completely flipped. Get ready for the craziest things you didn't know about the pharaohs, and let's say other elites in ancient Egypt. The strange practices of ancient Egypt. Crocodile dung as birth control? Ritual circumcision with flint knives? Yep, you heard me right. These are just glimpses into the surprisingly sophisticated and sometimes startling world of ancient Egypt. Ancient Egyptian women, particularly those in the royal court, faced the same concerns about family planning that we do today, but their methods were, let's just say they were uniquely ancient Egyptian. But why turn to crocodile dung as an answer to anything? Context is important for this one. One of the most important and revered gods in ancient Egypt was Sobek, the crocodile god, or a man with a crocodile head. He was associated with the Nile River, fertility, military prowess, and pharaonic power. He was a very powerful and protective deity, but also one to be feared. Crocodiles were seen as living embodiments of Sobek's power. Their strength, size, and predatory nature in the Nile made them potent symbols of both life-giving and destructive forces. So, by association, their dung must have powers too. Scientifically, the acidity of crocodile dung maybe had some effect as a primitive spermicide. It's a testament to the Egyptians' knowledge, or at least desire to experiment, even if it makes us wince a little. I mean, talk about a natural approach, right? Then there's the recipe from the Ebers Papyrus, dating back to around 1550 BC. This ancient medical text describes soaking seed wool in a concoction of ground thorn tree, dates, and honey, creating an early form of a feminine product. Again, the acidity and antibacterial nature of the ingredients likely played a key role, showing they weren't just throwing random stuff together. They were experimenting and observing. Now let's switch gears and talk about circumcision. I know, touchy subject, but it's part of history, and that's what you're here for. We have this amazing bas-relief in the mastaba of Ankh-Mahor, which dates back to the Old Kingdom, roughly 2686 to 2181 BC. It shows priests performing the ritual on young men with flint knives. It is the oldest known depiction of this practice, and it tells us it was a big deal, dating back to at least 4,700 years ago. But why? That's where it gets interesting. Scholars have all sorts of theories. Was it a rite of passage, marking the transition to manhood? A symbol of purity? A way to show your social standing? Maybe all of the above. Some even suggest hygienic reasons or spiritual development. But here's the thing. While it was common, especially for young men entering adolescence, it wasn't universal. And we see very few depictions of it in their art, which suggests it was a very specialized ritual. Where did this practice come from in the first place? It could have been an interpretation of one of their creation stories practiced by a small sect. We don't really know, but ancient Egypt, with its Old Kingdom origins and the Ebers Papyrus, provides the earliest documented examples, giving us a peek into their complex and fascinating world. It really makes you wonder about all the other things they were doing, doesn't it? The hairdos of the pharaohs. Everyone's always talking about how the pharaohs might have been gods or aliens or what have you, but no one ever asks the big question. What was the hairstyle like for the pharaohs 4,000 years ago? You may be surprised to learn that the ancient Egyptians had their own version of celebrity hairstylists and trendy barbershops. Hair wasn't just hair in ancient Egypt. It was a statement, a symbol, and sometimes a full-blown personality trait. From well-groomed mustaches to extravagant wigs that would make Marie Antoinette jealous, let's dive into the surprisingly fashion-forward world of Egyptian hair. Way before influencers and celebrity stylists, Egyptians knew the power of a good hair day. As early as the 3rd dynasty, or the 27th century BC, copper razors were found in the tomb of Hesire, a high-ranking official who had a thing for grooming. Barbers were no joke. They even had palace physicians, tasked with keeping the pharaoh's mane and mustache immaculate. One such royal stylist during the reign of Pharaoh Niuserre held an official title translating as Overseer of the Palace Barbers. Now that's something to put on your resume. Queens, of course, had their own personal stylist too, just like now. There is even a relief showing Queen Kawit's hairdresser working her magic, possibly whispering, "Your Highness, layers are in this season." But wait, why deal with bad hair days when you can just wear a wig? Wigs were all the rage in ancient Egypt, not just for fashion, but also for hygiene, because lice was a huge problem. Egypt's plague of lice was worse than your second grade class when that scruffy kid shared their hat with everyone, or that time at summer camp. Egyptian wigs were made from human hair, occasionally mixed with plant fibers for that extra volume boost. For hold and shine, they used beeswax and resin, the first ever hair gel. One preserved New Kingdom wig in the British Museum boasts 300 individual strands, each with 400 hairs. Pharaohs were dead serious about wigs. They were so vital that people ensured they had a wig prepared for the afterlife. Even in eternity, you can't be caught looking drab. Now let's talk stashes. In the Old Kingdom of Egypt, mustaches were a thing. Statues of great kings like Djoser, Khafre, and Menkaure, the pyramid guys, proudly sported the stash, and their officials followed suit. The most famous example is Prince Rahotep's limestone statue. That guy radiates pure confidence. But then, poof! No more mustaches by the Middle Kingdom. The decline of the mustache happened around the same time as Egypt's descent into political chaos and civil unrest. Perhaps like the bell-bottoms after the disco era, the mustache became a relic of better times. Mustaches, it seems, were a symbol of stability, power, and peak masculinity. When the good times ended, so did the facial hair. Hair wasn't just for looking good in this life. It played a role in funerary rites too. Professional mourners, people paid to mourn at the funerals of those who had no friends. Anyone else feeling kind of attacked? They were known to shake and pull their hair dramatically at funerals. Some even covered their faces with their hair, adding an extra touch of theatrical grief. For the ancient Egyptians, hair wasn't just an accessory, it was a legacy. Art, preserved wigs, and relief carvings give us a unique glimpse into their trends, proving that the obsession with good hair is timeless. And now for a quick break, because I want to give a big thank you to Jason USMC for the super thanks. It really means a lot, and we wouldn't be here without you. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already to join the Origins Explained family. The Pharaoh who fought a river. If you think picking a fight with your boss is risky, try going toe-to-toe with a flooded river. Pharaoh Pharaoh did, and he lost. Miserably. What kind of guy picks a fight with a body of water? King Pharaoh, that's who. According to the ancient historian Herodotus, when the Nile River overflowed, Pharaoh decided to attack it with a spear. Unsurprisingly, the river didn't flinch, but it did splash the pharaoh, who got water in his eyes and was struck blind for 10 years. That's the way the story goes anyway. After a decade of blindness and presumably deep regret, Pharaoh sought a cure for his sightless eyes. An oracle told him that the only remedy was to wash his eyes with the urine of a completely faithful wife. Weirdly specific, but okay. Anything to not be blind anymore. It didn't have to be his wife, just any loyal wife. So one by one, women lined up and peed in a cup. And one by one, King Pharaoh washed his eyes, but he wasn't recovering his sight. Not even his own wife's urine cured him. That must have made for an awkward conversation at home. Finally, after much trial and error, he found one woman whose golden elixir worked. Elated at his restored vision, but still salty about all the betrayal, Pharaoh celebrated by burning the unfaithful women alive. Wow, that took a dark turn fast. I guess ancient breakups really were brutal. To commemorate his miraculous recovery, Pharaoh erected an obelisk at Heliopolis. If you're wondering where that ended up, Pliny the Elder claims it was later hauled off to Rome and planted near the Vatican, but no one knows where it is today. In fact, some historians don't even think that Pharaoh was a real king. They say his creepy and weird legend might be a mashup of stories from multiple rulers. He's been called a myth, a fake pharaoh. While on the other hand, some think he is the pharaoh from the book of Exodus. Whether real or legendary, Pharaoh left behind one of history's strangest medical trials, proving that sometimes the cure really is worse than the disease. Ramses II's big happy family. Time for some family drama, ancient Egypt style. One pharaoh having too many kids may have doomed Egypt's 19th dynasty. This is one episode of Jerry Springer I would like to see, but unfortunately, I don't have a time machine. Ramses II was a legendary warrior, a master builder, and a prolific father of over 100 children. His reign was one of Egypt's most glorious, yet the very dynasty he strengthened would crumble under the weight of family rivalries and chaotic succession. You know when you fight for the remote with your sibling? Okay, now replace the remote with a royal throne and multiply your sibling by 100. Ramses II, also known as Ramses the Great, took the throne in 1279 BC, launching a reign that would become synonymous with power, military triumphs, and architectural marvels. From his youth, he was trained in governance and warfare, preparing to lead one of the world's most powerful civilizations. His rule saw daring military campaigns, including the famous Battle of Kadesh against the Hittites, which ended in the world's first recorded peace treaty. But Ramses wasn't just a warrior, he was a builder. He commissioned colossal statues, awe-inspiring temples, and the grand city of Ramses, a testament to his ambition. Behind the magnificence of his reign was a family so large that it would become impossible to manage. And that's where the cracks began to show. With over 100 children from multiple wives and concubines, Ramses II's family was more than just large. It was a political entity unto itself. His chief wife, Nefertari, not to be confused with Nefertiti, was a respected and influential figure. His sons and daughters held power too, serving as priests, generals, and governors. Prince Kamweset, one of Ramses' most accomplished sons, was a scholar dedicated to preserving Egypt's past. Meanwhile, Prince Merneptah was trained for leadership and eventually became heir to the throne. The daughters were also strategically placed in high-ranking religious roles, further entrenching the family's dominance. Who knew that nepotism was spelled Ramses? While Ramses II attempted to establish a clear line of succession, his long life really complicated matters. Ramses lived to be 90, meaning some of his children died before they could inherit a thing. When Ramses did croak, dozens of his sons came out of the woodwork to claim the throne. With so many claimants, factions formed within the court. Some princes aligned themselves with powerful nobles, while others sought military support. This internal instability wasn't just a personal struggle, it weakened Egypt's central authority at a time when the kingdom needed strong leadership. When Ramses II passed away, his 13th son, Merneptah, inherited the throne as planned. But by then, Egypt's political foundation was already fractured. Merneptah ruled for about a decade, fending off external threats while navigating the internal divisions left by his father's vast family. But Merneptah was already super old when he took the throne, and he soon died. Afterward, the succession turmoil only worsened. His successor, Seti II, faced a rival claimant, Amenmese, leading to a brief civil war. The last ruler of the dynasty was Queen Tuozeret, who continued to face opposition until a rival family swooped in and stole the throne from Ramses' kids. Would Egypt have fared better if Ramses II had fewer children? Or was the dynasty doomed by its own internal ambitions? How many kids is too many for one king? The divine feline. For the ancient Egyptians, cats were blessed with divinity. It's no secret that the Egyptians liked felines, but I think when you see just how far their cat obsession went, you're going to be surprised. DNA evidence suggests that wild cats first became domesticated in the Near East and Egypt around 10,000 years ago. Drawn by the promise of easy meals, they wandered into early agricultural societies and feasted on grain-stealing rodents. In return for hunting rats, humans welcomed the cats in, offering scraps and affectionate back rubs. And thus began the love-hate relationship between humans and felines. In Egypt, this relationship went far beyond pest control. Over time, cats evolved from useful hunters to sacred symbols, embodying gods and offering divine protection. The Egyptians looked at the cat the same way they looked at everything, as a way to explain and personify the universe. That's a quote from Egyptologist Melinda Hartwig, curator at Emory University's Michael C. Carlos Museum. However, let me clarify a common misconception. Egyptians did not worship cats. Rather, they believed that cats carried divine energy, particularly that of Bastet, the cat-headed goddess of fertility, home life, music, and pleasure. Because of this, cats were fiercely protected. At the height of Bastet's cult in the 2nd century BC, the penalty for killing a cat was death. That's a far cry from Europe in the Middle Ages, when popes were ordering good Christians to destroy all the cats they could find, leading to a rise in rat populations and the outbreak of the plague. But that's a story for another day. Egyptians also wore cat charms and amulets, believing they brought protection and good fortune. New Year's gifts often featured cat figurines, symbolizing luck and prosperity. Perhaps the most remarkable evidence of Egypt's deep reverence for cats is the sheer number of feline mummies unearthed in burial sites. At Saqqara and Tel Basta, the chief worship sites of Bastet, archaeologists have uncovered hundreds of thousands of mummified cats, many piled high in underground catacombs. Hartwig explained that ancient Egyptian priests maintained large temple catteries where cats were bred for the purpose of mummification. Worshippers visiting Bastet's temple would purchase a cat mummy as a votive offering, believing it would return divine energy to the goddess and bring them favor in return. Historian Herodotus claimed that when an Egyptian family's pet cat died, they would shave off their eyebrows in mourning. Would you do the same for your cat? Herodotus also gave an account of how in 525 BC, the Persian invaders under the rule of King Cambyses II used Egypt's reverence for cats against them. His soldiers carried feline images on their shields and drove live cats ahead of their army. Terrified of harming the sacred animals, the Egyptians allegedly surrendered without a fight. Keep in mind that Herodotus had a habit of embellishing stories, so no one knows if that one is true or not. Even still, the point stands. Egyptians loved cats. The next time you catch your cat gazing at you with that knowing, superior expression, remember, they are embracing their royal ancestry. Egyptians partied hard. Egyptians are the ones that came up with the slogan, "Work hard, play hard," long before it became a staple intro on people's dating profiles. Kings, queens, and commoners partied like the world was ending, probably because of the seriously weird cocktails they drank. Here's a scenario for you. Pretend it's ancient Egypt and you're with a group of friends in a dimly lit temple. A priest hands you a mug decorated with the face of Bes, the god of fertility, joy, and trippy experiences. You take a sip, wipe your mouth, and suddenly you're having visions, feeling euphoric, and questioning if that sphinx just winked at you. You just drank an Egyptian cocktail so strong it makes modern-day party drinks look like juice boxes. This mind-bending brew contained alcohol, psychoactive plants, human bodily fluids, a mix of medicinal ingredients, and some flavor enhancers. How do I know all this? Because researchers, led by Enrico Greco from the University of Trieste, ran chemical tests on a 2,000-year-old Bes mug found in Egypt. The mug contained traces of alcohol, of course, but also Peganum harmala, a plant known to cause dreamlike visions and hallucinations. Plus, it contained blue water lily, which itself contains aporphine, a compound that promotes relaxation and mild euphoria. Mixed in with these substances was honey, sesame seeds, pine nuts, licorice, and grapes. Sounds pretty yummy. They also added blood, mucus, and breast milk. Are you thirsty yet? Before you gag, researchers think these were added for symbolic reasons, possibly representing fertility and regeneration. Experts believe this concoction wasn't just a Friday night special. It wasn't something people sat around drinking in Egyptian taverns. Instead, it was likely used in religious and mystical ceremonies by royalty and priests. The Egyptians were all about using altered states of consciousness to connect with the divine and receive prophecies. According to researcher Davide Tanasi from the University of South Florida, this is the first time scientists have physically confirmed that Egyptians used psychedelics in rituals. Before, it was all just speculation based on ancient texts and temple carvings that looked suspiciously like someone mid-trip. Ritual or no ritual, would you like to try this mind-bending elixir of the pharaohs? Or is that going to be a hard pass? The pharaoh who wouldn't die. Gather round, my friends, and lend me your ears. This is a story of power, perseverance, and a man who refused to clock out. Tonight, we journey back to ancient Egypt, to an era where pyramids touched the sky. Our hero is a tiny boy who was crowned king at the ripe old age of 6. His name is Pepi II. His claim to fame is sticking around longer than anyone asked him to. Little did young Pepi know when he first sat on the throne with his little legs dangling, he would be working the gig for the next 94 years. He was the king of Egypt for longer than most people's lifetimes. At first, Egypt flourished, but only because his mother, Pepi II, and some seasoned advisors were running the show. Monuments were built, trade boomed, and people got their daily dose of pyramid construction cardio. One of the funniest moments from Pepi's early years was when he learned that a pygmy was on the way to the capital from distant lands. He grew obsessed and wrote a letter to the leader of the expedition promising great fortune if he brought the pygmy to court. That's what happens when you let a 6-year-old be king. But as Pepi grew older and older and older, the kingdom started to crack, and Pepi was too tired to care. The power went from being in his little boy hands to seeping outside the central authority in Memphis. Small governors and other ambitious people gradually collected more power, while Pepi II sat lazy and aging in his throne. He was king for so long that he became apathetic to the kingdom and allowed Egypt to gradually fall apart. In his 80s, his rivals grew bolder, taking more power. In his 90s, he was practically a zombie. He refused to die while Egypt fractured into smaller, warring regions. Nobles built their own tombs even more splendid than those of pharaohs. After almost a century, at 94 years old, Pepi II died. His body was mummified, surrounded by treasure, and placed in his pyramid. And what happened to Egypt? In one word, chaos. His death marked the beginning of the First Intermediate Period, one of the worst times in ancient Egypt. But that's what happens when one guy rules a whole kingdom from the age of 6 to 94. At some point, he just stopped caring. I have an even worse pharaoh to tell you about later, plus some really disturbing romance with the freshly dead. So hit that subscribe button and don't go anywhere. Crime and punishment in ancient Egypt. Have you ever wondered what happened if you got caught stealing in ancient Egypt? Spoiler alert, it wasn't good. If you think modern punishments are harsh, ancient Egyptian justice makes them look like a slap on the wrist. Because in ancient Egypt, you'd probably lose the whole hand. This one isn't about weird pharaohs as much as it is about weird punishments. But to be fair, they were often dished out by pharaohs. Ancient Egypt's legal system was built on the principle of ma'at, meaning harmony and balance. The idea was simple: live in peace, follow the rules, and don't mess things up for everyone else. If you did mess things up, the consequences were severe. Unlike today's slow-moving legal system where cases can take months or years to resolve, ancient Egypt had a much faster approach. Prison was unlikely. You were more likely to be whipped, mutilated, enslaved, or straight up executed on the spot. Pharaohs didn't have time to build fancy prison cells when they were busy building pyramids. Instead, punishments were immediate and often, let's say, memorable, like being burned alive or having your nose chopped off. And no, there was no appeals process. In the rare case that you actually got a trial, you didn't get a lawyer. You got a jury and a bunch of witnesses who were encouraged to tell the truth by being beaten. The final say came from either the pharaoh or the vizier, who acted like the chief justice, prime minister, and executioner all in one. If you were convicted, your sentence ranged from public humiliation to being thrown in a crocodile pit. Not sure which I would prefer, being publicly lashed or forced to fight 12 crocs. Which punishment would you choose? Policing in ancient Egypt was unique. Officers were in charge of maintaining order, stopping tomb raiders, and investigating crimes. But the best and weirdest part is that they had trained baboons as law enforcement assistants. These little furry officers were trained to chase down criminals and detain them. Imagine running from the cops only to get tackled by a screaming primate. Crime truly did not pay in Egypt. Here are some of the punishments the pharaoh ordered for certain crimes. If you stole something, you might have had your hands cut off. If you were a woman caught cheating, your husband could either forgive you or have you burned alive. Hopefully, you married a forgiving guy. Murder was a crime against the state, often punished by execution, sometimes by being fed to crocodiles. Tomb robbery was the worst thing you could do. Egyptians took the afterlife very seriously, as we all know from their obsession with tombs and mummies. If you were caught tomb robbing, you were tortured, mutilated, or executed, maybe even all three. Did you know the Egyptians had their own gulag? If you were a lucky criminal who managed to avoid death, you might have been sent to a place called Rhinocolura. It was a settlement for convicts who had all had their noses chopped off, like a leper colony and a gulag mixed into one. Sounds pretty awful. The richest man in the world. There are a few contenders for richest man who ever lived. Among them is a pharaoh who, thanks to a recent project by scientists, experts now know was hideously ugly. And I don't say that to be mean. You might think history's richest man had a chiseled jawline, flowing royal locks, and an aura of untouchable power. Think again. Scientists reconstructed the face of Amenhotep III, and let's just say money can't buy good health. This ancient Egyptian pharaoh, one of the wealthiest rulers to ever exist, was revealed to be obese, bald, sickly, and suffering from some questionable dental hygiene. If ancient Egypt had dentists, he definitely wasn't visiting them. Brazilian designer Cicero Moraes, the mastermind behind this facial reconstruction, was thrilled with the results. He said it is the first time in over 3,000 years that the king's face has been seen. And what a face it is! But wait, who was Amenhotep III? In the 14th century BC, Amenhotep III ruled Egypt during its absolute peak. He was the Jeff Bezos of the ancient world, minus the space rockets and overpriced streaming service. Under his rule, Egypt became ridiculously wealthy, culturally dominant, and overflowing with grand architectural projects. Despite all of his success, he looked less like a divine ruler and more like an overindulgent king who had never skipped dessert in his life. Using data from his mummified skull, scientists pieced together his facial features with the help of modern anatomical measurements. The final product revealed a man who was significantly overweight, probably because being the ruler of an empire meant unlimited access to ancient buffets. He was also mostly bald, his teeth looked like a broken picket fence, and he was often sick from his lazy lifestyle. Imagine if King Tut had an out-of-shape uncle who spent most of his reign lounging in a golden recliner. That's Amenhotep III. Now, here's where it gets even wilder. Dr. Michael Habecht, an archaeologist from Flinders University, believes Amenhotep III might have been entirely covered in gold leaf. You knew it had to get weird at some point. The pharaoh was shining brighter than a Grammy Award when he went out in public, showing off his wealth by lathering himself in actual gold. Couldn't he have worn a big gold crown or something? It seems a bit overkill, but Amenhotep may have had a good reason. It's likely that he was overcompensating for his height. While his bank account was massive, his height was not. Scientists estimate he was around 5'1", shorter than the average teenager. But hey, when you're rich enough to build an empire, does height even matter? Amenhotep III ruled until his 40s or 50s. His death marked the end of one of Egypt's greatest golden ages, literally and figuratively. The richest man in history had all the money in the world, but still couldn't escape male pattern baldness, cavities, and a bulging gut from endless pigging out. Necrophilia in ancient Egypt. It's not exactly a word that comes out of my mouth often, but you want weird, so weird you're going to get. Necrophilia. It's something defined as a creepy fascination with dead bodies that in some unfortunate cases turns into something much worse. You would hope it's the kind of thing only found in horror movies, but history begs to differ. It turns out that even in ancient Egypt, some people took things way too far. Our Greek friend, historian Herodotus, reported that Egyptians waited several days before embalming exceptionally beautiful women. Why? Was it so they could admire their beauty a little longer? Or was it because some embalmers couldn't keep their hands to themselves and liked being, let's say, close to the dead? As gross as it is, the latter is the real reason. Embalmers could not be trusted with the corpses of beautiful women, so their families let them rot a little bit before taking them to be embalmed. It wasn't even strictly an Egypt-only problem. In Judea, King Herod from the Bible allegedly took his obsession with a certain woman to the extreme. After she died, to avoid marrying him, which really says a lot already, some sources claim he preserved her body in honey for 7 years. But wait, there's more. In South America, the Moche civilization, who thrived from 100 to 800 AD, left behind pottery that depicts skeletal figures getting freaky with the living. You know, just your typical dinnerware. They served soup in bowls covered in artwork of the dead hooking up with the living. Whether this was something the Moche practiced in real life or just symbolic in art, experts aren't sure. In medieval Europe, accusations of necrophilia were used as a way to smear political and religious enemies. The Lollards, a religious reform group in the 14th century, were accused of all sorts of wild things, including getting a little too cozy with corpses. Whether or not there was any truth to it, historians aren't sure, but one thing is clear: if you really hated someone, just accuse them of necrophilia and watch the chaos unfold. And then, of course, there was Guy de Rais, a 15th century French nobleman with a resume straight out of a horror flick. He was convicted of murdering and violating people and their corpses. He went from being Joan of Arc's war buddy to one of the most infamous serial killers in history. And now, hopefully, I never have to talk about this again. Hope you can sleep tonight.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to stay tuned for extra content you might have missed. Head cone mystery. Strange cone-shaped hats are a common feature of ancient Egyptian artwork of all types, showing their use in rituals, feasts, and even childbirth. The hat's repeated appearances span a lengthy period, indicating that they were used for over 1,000 years. Yet archaeologists had never unearthed one, and they also could not figure out what the exact purpose of the hats was, leading researchers to speculate that the headwear was purely symbolic in nature, not necessarily something that the ancient Egyptians actually used or wore. Perhaps, scholars theorized the hats were similar to halos. Less than 2 years ago, however, archaeologists revealed that they had found the first physical evidence of the bizarre head cones. A study describes how the researchers discovered the objects in 2009 in Amarna, an ancient city dating back to the 14th century BC, which once housed around 30,000 people, but was only significant for around 15 years. The hats were found in 2 modest burials belonging to ordinary people. While these graves generally do not contain valuable items, the hats were of immense value to researchers. Upon further examination, they found that the artifacts were not solid pieces of perfumed fat, as previously theorized, but that the caps are hollowed shells formed around a black or brown material that might be cloth. But the mystery isn't completely solved. While there are signs that the headpieces may have had something to do with fertility, it's difficult for the team to assess their meaning since they were discovered in non-elite burials. But artwork generally shows high-ranking members of society wearing them. One thing is clear, according to archaeologist Nicola Harrington, who told National Geographic that essentially the cones are worn in the presence of the divine. She theorizes that those who wore the hats may have been dancers, as both skeletons bear evidence of spinal fractures and one shows signs of a degenerative joint disease, ailments that are reportedly common among professional dancers. But her suspicion is nothing more than a guess, and until or unless more archaeological evidence comes along, experts may never know what the head cones were used for. Empty coffin surprise. An Egyptian sarcophagus discovered in 1860 was mistakenly classified as empty and sat untouched at a university museum in Sydney, Australia for over 150 years. It is 2,500 years old, and recently scientists decided to take another look. In 2018, scientists opened the lid for the first time and discovered the tattered remains of a mummy inside. They were very excited about what secrets this mummy might reveal about the ancient world. An excavation and CT scan revealed the presence of bones, bandages, resin fragments, and over 7,000 beads from a funeral shawl. Based on hieroglyphs found in the sarcophagus, the mummy was that of an ancient high priestess named Merenith Es, who lived and died around 600 BC. She worked in the temple of the lion-headed goddess Sekhmet and was at least 30 years old when she died. Even though the coffin hadn't been touched until just now, before it made it to the museum sometime in the past, her tomb had been ransacked by looters and raiders, and her remains had been torn apart. Just 10% of the mummy is inside the coffin, with pretty much everything else missing or destroyed. Experts continued studying the mummy in hopes of learning more about her lifestyle and any diseases she may have suffered from. And now for a mummy with a gold tongue. But first, want to say a big thank you to Lexi Dodson and Baker Baker. You guys make my day. If you are new here, welcome, and be sure to subscribe to Origins Explained if you haven't already. Golden-tongued mummy. Earlier this year, a team of Egyptian and Dominican archaeologists announced the discovery of a 2,000-year-old mummy at Taposiris Magna, an ancient Egyptian city in modern-day Alexandria that has temples dedicated to the god Osiris and the goddess Isis, who was both his sister and wife. While mummies are being discovered left and right, the strange thing about this one was that this one had a large tongue made of gold. The Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities said in a statement that embalmers may have placed the golden tongue on the mummy so that the deceased individual could speak to the gods in the afterlife. Researchers are unsure why the tongue is made of gold, or if maybe the person had an actual speech impediment throughout their life. Led by archaeologist Kathleen Martinez, the team found the mummy among 16 newly discovered burials at the site. Included among the other fascinating finds are 2 mummies who were found buried with scrolls, which experts are currently deciphering to see what they say. The mummy's cartonnage, or plaster, bears golden decorations of Osiris. Additionally, the team discovered several remarkably well-preserved statues depicting the deceased, who are pictured in formal stances and attire, and not smiling. The individuals either lived between 304 and 30 BC, when the Ptolemies ruled Egypt, or after the Roman Empire came into power in 30 BC, following Cleopatra's death. Mummified animals. In 2018, archaeologists discovered a trove of mummified animals at the Step Pyramid of Saqqara, a vast burial ground near what is now Cairo. The cache consists of hundreds of artifacts dating back roughly 2,600 years to Egypt's 26th dynasty, including masks, statues, and the mummified remains of cats, cobras, crocodiles, birds, and 2 lion cubs, amounting to at least 75 animals. It is incredibly rare to come across intact lion remains in ancient Egypt. In fact, the pair, who died at around 8 months old, are the first ever mummified lion cubs ever discovered, and the entire collection of animals is unprecedented, despite Saqqara being a vast burial ground that was used for over 3,000 years. Besides the lion cubs, there were 3 other mummified wildcats at the site, whose species remain unidentified, and 20 smaller felines. The team who made the discoveries consider a large scarab statue to be one of their most significant finds. It's the biggest artifact of its type ever discovered, according to Mustafa Waziri, Secretary General of Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities. It was not uncommon for the ancient Egyptians to mummify and bury animals, but the size of this particular collection certainly stands out. They engaged in these practices both because they believed animals were reincarnations of gods and as offerings to the gods. Misidentified mud mummy. Archaeologists recently described the only known ancient Egyptian mummy wrapped in a carapace, or a shell, made of hardened mud. Dating back roughly 3,400 years to 1207 BC, this one-of-a-kind female mummy was damaged after death and was found in the wrong coffin, misidentifying it as a woman named Merua or Maruta. Acquired during the 19th century by an English-Australian politician named Sir Charles Nicholson, he donated it to the University of Sydney in 1860. But the woman's remains are several hundred years older than the coffin it was found in. The coffin dates back to around 1000 BC. See, this is why the University Museum is trying to get organized now. There was a lot of chaos surrounding all these Egyptian mummies and sarcophagi they were getting in the 1800s. When asked why the embalmers may have used mud instead of resin, lead researcher Karen Sawada explained in an interview with Life Science that mud is a more affordable material. In other words, this may have been a way for people with less money to receive a proper burial, leading researchers to think that this embalming technique may have been somewhat common, despite there only being one of these examples ever discovered. As for why the mummy was placed into the wrong coffin, the team thinks that Nicholson was duped by whoever sold him the artifacts. Local dealers likely placed an unrelated mummified body in the coffin to sell a more complete set, a well-known practice in the local antiquities trade, the researchers wrote in the study. Coffin plus mummy was more valuable. While these findings were only recently published, experts first noticed something odd about the mummy in 1999 while examining a CT scan of it. Upon further examination, they found the sand-like mixture that was used to encase the deceased person. Now, with better technology, another team revisited the specimen in 2017 and discovered the additional strange details, including the woman's damaged knee and leg, which may have happened at the hands of grave robbers and prompted embalmers to repair and rewrap her in the mud carapace. Extinct goose. Experts have determined that 3 geese depicted in the artwork of an ancient Egyptian tomb belonging to Nefermat I and his wife Itet represent an extinct species, offering a rare glimpse of an animal that no longer exists. Dating back some 4,600 years, the painting, a famous piece of artwork called Maydom Geese and nicknamed the Mona Lisa of Egypt, features a real creature, unlike many ancient Egyptian depictions of mythical deities and animals. The fresco, which is now housed at Cairo's Museum of Egyptian Antiquities, was discovered in 1871 at a site in Lower Egypt called Maydom. Archaeologists and other researchers were puzzled about the birds for quite some time, until evolutionary biologist Dr. Anthony Romelio recently examined the animals and spotted what he believes is a speckled goose that is not seen in the modern world. Artistic license could account for the difference with modern geese, but artworks from this site have extremely realistic depictions of other birds and mammals, Romelio said in a statement. These other creatures include dogs, cattle, leopards, and antelope, leading Romelio to believe it would make no sense to include fictional geese in the mix. Previously, the birds were thought to be a red-breasted goose species, which are found in Europe, not North Africa, where no such remains have ever been found, and do not exactly match the geese in the painting. From a zoological perspective, the Egyptian artwork is the only known documentation of this distinctively patterned goose, which appears now to be globally extinct, said Romelio. Researchers say that it's unlikely they'll ever know what caused the species' extinction. Stacked coffins. Last September, Egypt's Ministry of Antiquities announced the discovery of 13 wooden coffins dating back to 500 BC at the vast Saqqara necropolis, located roughly 20 miles south of modern-day Cairo. The remains are surprisingly well preserved, pristine, according to scientists, despite being over 2,500 years old. They were in such good condition, some of the colors painted on the coffins were still visible. Archaeologists found the sarcophagi stacked atop one another in a burial shaft, roughly 36 feet underground, and the team believes there may be more still to be found in there. Saqqara served as the necropolis for the ancient Egyptian capital of Memphis for an estimated 3,000 years. Researchers have made many fascinating discoveries at the sprawling site, including the graves of high-ranking nobles and other elite members of society. But the recently discovered coffin's remarkable state of preservation has them perplexed, wondering how the sarcophagi stayed in such good condition for so long, especially since they're made of wood, which usually rots over time, leaving the human remains within exposed to the elements. Plus, they are lucky that grave robbers didn't get there first and smash everything to bits. Regardless of what factors caused the coffins to remain in such great shape, the discovery is extremely exciting due to its promising ability to teach experts new things about ancient Egyptian burial customs. Doomsday Prediction. The tomb of Khentkaus III, a queen from Egypt's Old Kingdom whose husband, Pharaoh Neferefre, ruled around 4,500 years ago, allegedly contains an ominous doomsday prediction in the form of climate change evidence. The finding, which was announced last November, is helping to fill in some gaps in what Professor Miroslav Barta calls a black patch in the history of the Old Kingdom. Khentkaus III was laid to rest in a tomb 650 feet away from her husband at a necropolis in Abu Sir, located southwest of Cairo. Until her burial was discovered, she was, for the most part, unknown. Her tomb contains graffiti labeling her as the Queen Mother. Professor Barta is part of a team from the Czech Institute of Egyptology that is working together to examine the chamber's contents, which include pottery, copper, woodwork, animal bones, and more. They plan to radiocarbon date and examine Khentkaus III's bones in hopes of determining her age at death, any health conditions she suffered from, and possibly even how many children she had. Unfortunately, the queen's skull was found smashed, likely due to grave robbers, making a facial reconstruction extremely difficult, if not entirely impossible. The full investigation of the tomb is projected to take around 2 years. Speaking with CNN about the time when Khentkaus lived and died, he said it was a crucial period when the Old Kingdom started to face major critical factors: the rise of democracy, the horrific impact of nepotism, and the role played by interest groups. He added that climate change was also a factor in bringing Egypt's Old Kingdom to an end, with drought becoming a regular occurrence within 200 years of the Queen Mother's death. The Nile no longer flooded and everything just dried out. Evidence inside the tomb, including artifacts and inscriptions, reportedly points toward climate change becoming increasingly problematic in governing the Old Kingdom, with reduced harvests affected by the changing weather, meaning that less taxes could be collected and therefore less money for the society. This led to the fall of the Old Kingdom Empire as well as those in the Middle East and Western Europe at the time. The team hopes to elaborate on these clues as they delve deeper into their ongoing analysis. The Hyksos origins. Ancient Egypt is not often thought of as a multicultural melting pot, despite periods of rulership by different societies. But the plain and simple truth is that the region was more diverse than it is often given credit for. Until recently, experts speculated that a mysterious group called the Hyksos, who ruled during the 15th dynasty, invaded and conquered ancient Egypt as outsiders. A study published last year indicates, however, that these people were not foreign intruders after all. Archaeological evidence shows that the Hyksos did indeed come to Egypt from somewhere else, but that they rose to power from within Egyptian society after migrating there sometime before. All signs point toward the group having originally come from the Near East, but the dynamics behind their arrival in Egypt and subsequent rise to power are still somewhat of a mystery. Working with colleagues, Chris Stantis of Bournemouth University, UK, collected tooth enamel samples from the remains of 75 individuals at the ancient Hyksos capital of Tel El Daba in the northeast Nile Delta. By comparing the ratios of strontium isotopes from the samples with environmental isotope signatures from Egypt and other places, they learned that most of the individuals buried at Tel El Daba were non-locals who came there from somewhere else, both before and after the Hyksos rose to power and fell from it. These findings indicate that the Hyksos did not all migrate collectively around the same time as part of a unified movement like a group of invaders would. Instead, it appears as though the Hyksos were a multicultural group who eventually came to rule ancient Egypt after gradually integrating into and assimilating with society. Archaeological chemistry, specifically isotopic analysis, shows us first-generation migration during a time of major cultural transformations in ancient Egypt, Stantis explained, adding that rather than the old scholastic theories of invasion, we see more people, especially women, migrating to Egypt before Hyksos rule, suggesting economic and cultural changes leading to foreign rule rather than violence. While this study is groundbreaking in terms of identifying the Hyksos origins, the team admitted that more research is necessary to determine exactly where these people came from. Thanks for watching! Remember to subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Bye!